In this video, I'd like to share my thoughts on why at this stage of the game, before Shadowlands launches, you should seriously consider healing. Pros and cons coming right up. Welcome back to the channel, everyone. Today I'll be offering you my opinion on whether or not you should try a healing role in BFA patch 8.3 as a semi-bored casual player who is waiting for Shadowlands as much as I do. It's already clear to you that I'm gonna say yes, I think you should consider healing, as the pros of this process heavily outweigh the cons, in my opinion. So over the next 10 minutes, I will try and offer you as many of those pros and cons as I see them, so that you can make your decision easier. We will start with the pros and follow up with the cons. As always, please use the table of contents in the description of this video and in the timeline in case you're only interested, let's say, in cons or whatever. So yeah, let's get started. So pro number one. Healing is something new for you to do. If you are already a dedicated healer, chances are that your decision was made long ago and you came here just to watch this video, just to show your support for me and the other viewers who are currently on the fence perhaps around this role and on the fence about healing in BFA. So firstly, I'd like to thank you for doing that, if that is in fact what you're doing, and encourage you to leave a comment down below to share your thoughts with the others and allowing them to learn from you, from your experience. Tell me if you agree with my pros and cons, with my view of the healing role, and what else you have to add. So as a quick reminder, I am a solo casual altaholic of World of Warcraft. I play many alts, and I assume that my core crowd that I'm talking to here are similar people. So for us, guys and girls, finding the new role that we have not touched ever, or at least for a very long time, could suddenly mean weeks, if not months, of true fun and a different perspective on the familiar content. So it's a huge pro. If it is in fact something new for you to do, if I'm right in my assumption, then healing as a role would be a remarkable discovery for you and something tremendous for you to do and occupy yourself with. Pro number two. Healing groups is actually the easiest way for someone to gear up beyond your initial endgame solo and world questing adventures perhaps. This basic notion kind of belongs to my old raid leader from the times of Wrath of the Lich King, when I used to raid in an organized manner as opposed to just LFR as I do now from time to time. So yes, it's been years. And I know that some of you will say, what? Like, surely it's not the easiest way to gear up, blah, blah, blah. But let me just make this statement because I truly believe in it, and then follow up with a few other pros that will hopefully illustrate this or explain this in another way. So pro number three is that, in my opinion, oh God, we're about to talk about another contentious kind of statement, but in my opinion, healing is the easiest role to perform in a Mythic Plus or any other not cutting-edge raid group, for example. Now, before you tell me how wrong I am, please pay attention to the not cutting-edge part of this statement. We will talk about cutting-edge in the cons in a minute. So gear, again, is the main way, as I keep saying in many of my videos, in my opinion, gear is the main way of progressing your character in WoW. It is and always has been. The other things like collecting mounts, gear transmogrification, playing pet battles are mini games that are wonderful, especially they preoccupy some people, maybe even full-time in the game, but they can't seriously compete with the main game design. Come on. You want gear progression? Well, you're forced to gear up with people beyond a certain point. That is just how Blizzard made this game, okay? The only exception that we've seen in years were my beloved horrific visions that are about to go away in Shadowlands, and Torghast sounds like it, won't offer us gear or meaningful progression in terms of possessions, as opposed to fun, as opposed to whatever else, as opposed to, I don't know if they will ever add a leaderboard, achievements, whatever it is. But we won't see any eye-level gear that we are currently seeing, even in a limited capacity, but we're still seeing it from Horrific Visions. It's about to go away. Tanks, as a role, you know how much I love tanks. You know that I had a rather, well, similar, I suppose, but a little more ranty video where I was encouraging you to try tanking, and I still do. But tanks need to know the way, and they need to have a certain level of initiative. They need to understand a lot of mechanics like Mythic Plus affixes, such as the one we've discussed very recently in the Awakened Obelisks. If Awakened Affix, I mean, and the Obelisks of Anzoth, the Spires, if you go high enough in Mythic Plus, which you might. And DPS is expected to, most importantly, and very, very unfairly, I would say, DPS is everywhere expected to severely overgear content that they are recruited for. I've had people apply for Mythic Plus 0 and Mythic Plus 2 groups in eye level 470, believe it or not. So do you think that if that's the trend that anyone would expect these days in WoW, and I know it's been like that for years, I'm not challenging it at this point, even though I don't disagree with it, but if you think that that's the trend, will anyone actually take you into a Mythic Plus 0, Mythic Plus 2, Mythic Plus 4 as a DPS dressed in 430s or 440s? It's not gonna happen. It's not gonna happen. You're dreaming, my friend. Which is why it's much easier to heal. Yeah. Pro number 4. Healing offers you a potentially most passive and lazy playstyle. So I know that a lot of people will say, yo, Gyro, my dude, how is that a good thing? Well, believe it or not, for a lot of us, or in case you are like me, for a lot of us, this is a huge plus, this is a huge benefit, because we don't want to always push in the game. We don't want to always work for it, so to speak. Imagine me doing the air quotes here with my fingers. Basically, sometimes, not always, I'm not saying always, but sometimes that's exactly what we want. That's exactly what we want. And being a healer in a group is something that is the only role that has a potential to offer you that playstyle. Even when being decently geared or running lower Mythic Plus keys, right? Tanks and DPS need to work for it. They need to pull mobs. They need to LOS casters. They need to interrupt actively. They need to mash buttons like there is no tomorrow. Yes, you as a healer in that scenario also would need to work to keep them all alive, but by now and in the lower Mythic Plus keys, you know, especially if you created the group yourself and had a chance to make sure that nobody is trying to sneak in wearing eye level, I don't know, 370 gear. You don't have to work hard at all, it's just a fact of life. By now majority of people know the mechanics of the dungeons, everything is old news. Decently geared DPS will just melt everything, and an okay tank will move you along quite efficiently. I know it myself because I am one of those people. You just need to keep them topped up, and don't be hard on yourself if someone dies to their own mistake, or if someone pulled a huge extra crowd of adds that your group would have not survived anyway. Doesn't matter if you were not able to keep them all alive. Pro number 5, that probably I'm gonna make the last one listing here the pros, because we can talk about this for a long time, that in many scenarios healing is also the most appreciated role that you can play, if that's something you're after, because there's nothing wrong with wanting to be appreciated once in a while, even in a game. So say in PvP, you'd be most complimented and most protected by the group, or at least you should be, and if you're not, your group sucks. Being the primary target of the enemy team is obviously a con that you probably should be aware of, but that is a separate kind of note here. So there are pros and cons to everything. But if you want to be appreciated and being protected and, you know, praised more often than not, then healer is for you. So speaking of cons, let's smoothly transition into those. Why would you still not consider being a healer? And I certainly wouldn't push you for it, like I never do. I just encourage you here. I try to rally my people. So main proof of why I would not take that approach and I would not push you for it is that I'll honestly try and list these cons, okay? Let's not shy away, so to speak, from them. So con number one is the potential social pressure from the group. I'm not going to call it toxicity, but it could come to that. But let's call it social pressure. And let's also make it very clear that you have to be unlucky for that to generally happen. It's not a status quo. So don't turn this con. It's definitely a con, but it should not be an immediate deterrent. It should not. I don't think so. See, I have to add and emphasize one extra time this if you're unlucky part, as it unfortunately plays a big role in a life of a healer, of course. So one could argue that any role and any class in WoW are subjected to that social RNG when playing with others. Or basically, you could be grouping up with nice and patient people who know what they're doing and what you can and cannot do for them as a healer. So their expectations are realistic. Or you could be unlucky with a tank who doesn't care and doesn't check if you have mana, or who pulls mega huge groups of ads without paying attention to how the rest of their group DPS or you, how they're trailing behind, you know, and how everyone's health is dipping. So you could be really, really unlucky, or you could be lucky, or just, you know, kind of have what in my experience is more of an average experience. Average experience is that things should be okay, you know? So generally, what I'm trying to say is that these days I don't see too much of that toxicity or social pressure happening, at least not for healers, because everyone generally is either, you know, sensitive to healers' needs, or they just openly love them. And that's one of the, again, pros that I listed for you. There are always people who think they know better how you should play your role, but generally people in WoW choose to be harsh on underperforming DPS, normally, or sometimes even on tanks who pull too much or don't know boss mechanics. It happens, yeah? But healers are sensitive flowers who we all love and appreciate. That is the general gist of it. So while the potential of this social pressure is definitely a con, I would say overall it's unlikely to be toxic or bad enough for you to see it as a deterrent or just kind of not heal and insist on not healing because of that. Con number two, very closely connected. All my cons that I have to list for you here are connected. So con number two is that healing is stressful to some extent by definition, okay? We'll expand on that, don't worry. So Mythic Plus and raids above LFR, obviously, are not always a joke. Sometimes, as I said already, you can have a very decent group of good people who simply don't overgear the content that they're queuing for. So let's say Mythic Plus 0, baseline Mythic, gives you 430 gear in 8.3 before Shadowlands launches, yeah? And you might have a fair group of people in 430s, dressed in 430s, geared to 430 item level. The content is designed to be challenging at that item level, so it's not gonna feel like a pushover, especially if people pull more than ideally expected to pull, like not just one by one, but people generally tend to try and go through content as fast as they can, and that's just how it is. It's always going to be like that. Now, if you think a little further and you add a few Mythic Plus affixes, such as bursting, where DPS needs to not just tunnel vision the boss, but also run around and kill explosive orbs that are spawning around them, as one of the example of mechanics, things can get very hectic for them and for you as a healer, because the situation can digress very, very fast, okay? So when I say if a DPS does something wrong and dies, it's not your fault as a healer, I obviously don't mean that you should just prepare to wave it off and not save their sorry bums. You should. You're a healer, right? And that's where the stress potential could come from. And needless to say that it's also very, very manageable by setting your macros, add-ons, making sure that your job is easier as a healer, and definitely learning boss mechanics before you go blind into a dungeon, not knowing when to, I don't know, pop that healing, increase cooldown, or help extra with interrupts, or even DPS sometimes if you feel confident enough and there is room for that. Now let's slowly transition towards the last con that I'm gonna list, and as I said, they're all very connected. It's almost like a gradual increase in terms of gravity of the situation, in terms of how bad it can become. So con number 3 is that healing can also become a nightmare. I know previous I said it can be stressful, but guys, stressful is not a nightmare, okay? So at higher Mythic Plus keys, I'm talking about higher Mythic Plus keys, because where else do you see yourself as being this healer? Either competitive raiding, which I'm not that crazy familiar with. I've done it in Wrath of the Lich King ages ago, right? But I wasn't healer back then. But at higher competitive heroic raiding, mythic raiding, I can imagine it would be the same as Mythic Plus, except Mythic Plus, it's a focused environment. Your performance, you're not the only healer of the group. Everything is on you. And for everything that was just said about stress, I had to isolate this point into a separate con, just to make sure that you understand that, in my opinion, some level of expected and stimulating stress for a healer who is playing that role willingly in a group should be expected and be normal. People need to have fun playing their class and a role. Some roles are challenging in their own way. I would argue all of them should be somewhat challenging to remain fun, right? So part of the fun of being a healer is that mild stress, let's call it mild level of stress, of triaging your wounded friends on the battlefield and making sure that you take care of your group. If that's not your thing at all, then you shouldn't heal, full stop, okay? But this con point talks about higher difficulty content, where stress can become an absolute nightmare, like I was already kind of implying in the previous point, where we talk about extra affixes, multiple things to watch out for, explosions, dead bodies everywhere, that kind of stuff. The fine line between acceptable stress, that's part of heal's job, and what I'm talking about here, where it turns into a nightmare, that will feel you like you haven't signed up for it at all, and it's definitely there, that fine line, and you very much need to be aware of it. And you need to decide for yourself exactly where that line is. And that probably will be the final decision maker for you. Is healing for you? Is it not? And that's all I wanted to tell you about my thoughts on healing and BFA on the verge of Shadowlands. I genuinely would not recommend going into new content as a healer, because I think unless you're a dedicated healer, let's leave it for those people who I very much respect. But from my perspective, once again, reminding you of how I look at these things, I do think that first you need to explore, get a feel for the new content, understand, perhaps get into normal dungeons and heroic dungeons through automatic group finder, which is very, very easy for DPS to queue up for as well, just so that you have an idea of what you're dealing with before you cross that threshold of becoming socially exposed to people forming groups in some other ways than automatic means that World of Warcraft offers to us, so that you basically are just a little bit more confident. So that's what I'm suggesting here. So healing, in my opinion, can be very rewarding breath of fresh air for someone who was tanking or DPSing for most of their time in WoW. So go explore your own potential, help others, try and find ways to have more fun. And that's the main thing for us not to forget, and what I keep telling my viewers, my friends and supporters. WoW is a game, and we need to have fun in it, find ways to have fun in it, rather than treat it as a bunch of chores, daily chores, or like a second job. Okay, so on this hopefully more positive note, I'd like to thank you all for tuning in today and encourage you to subscribe for more videos coming to you every 2 days to show your support. And I will talk to you next time.